Today is actually about the liberal arts. As I say, it's a style of teaching. It's a style of education. 教育の仕方. But the word liberal arts does refer to subjects, 中身. And there are supposed to be 7 liberal arts. In the ancient world, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, they didn't talk about 7 liberal arts. They talked about the importance of thinking, of mathematics, of having a broad education, but they didn't say 7. The 7 comes later, in the Roman period. And just give you very, very general time. Greece is about, when did we say Socrates died? Do you remember? 399, right? Let's make 400. Okay, 5th century, 400 BC, okay? So that's time of Greece. Rome is the Roman Empire. That's just around the time of the birth of Christ. Remember the whole drama of Jesus and the Pontius Pilate so that whole Rome is just before and after the birth of Christ. So let's just say like that, 0. Okay, so there's 400 years. And then maybe 400 AD. So この100年の間、少し見たい. Maybe a little bit longer. So today I'm going to look at how some of those ideas about education that Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, right, were thinking about, how they changed, how they became more systematic. They became kind of organized. 312 AD. This is the beginning of the rule of Constantine, Emperor Constantine, and he was the first Christian Roman emperor. So at the beginning here, Rome was very much opposed to Christianity. But then the conversion of Christianity, after here, Christianity starts to spread quite widely after 312. Rome, do you know this word pagan? How do you spell pagan? P-A-G-E-N? P-A-G-A-N, nay. It's not such a good word, really, but many of the Christians, later referred back to the time of people who were not Christians. So let's take this away. That they had their own religious rituals, which were not Christian. But so Greeks, Romans, and then began the Christian period here. And so eventually, these liberal arts, which began in a time without Christianity, become absorbed in Christianity, taken in. Let me give you words here now. It's a foundation laid in Greece, the ancient Greeks, and around the time of the 400 BC. They flourished in the Roman period. And then they also started to spread when Christianity started to spread throughout Europe after Constantine. The 7 liberal arts became part of that tradition. So, and then became, when we talk about the medieval period, some of you might have read today about the door at Chartres. That's the medieval period. And by that time, seven liberal arts are part of Christian education. So I want to look at that transition from the Roman times to the Christian times, or the Greek and Roman classical, if you like, to the Christian. You get the point? Let me just show you something here. And I want to show how Christianity appropriated the liberal arts. Now let's look at that word. To appropriate. Spelling all right? Appropriate. Anybody know that word? It's a nice word. To appropriate. Nice big word, okay? If I appropriate something, or if the Christians appropriate something that was originally from the Greeks and Romans, it means to what? Any got the idea? To make it one's own. Take somebody else's thing. It's like stealing, ubao. It almost has that idea of to take away from and use for yourself. To make it your own. To basically, 彼のものを盗んで私に使います。But you might change it a little bit. 変形して take something and then kind of change it a little bit and use it for yourself. But you take it from outside, and then you use it for yourself. So this appropriated the liberal arts. You talk about, we know various ancient Christian thinkers, often saints, like, do you know St. Thomas Aquinas? He is very famous for one book called the Summa Theologica. Yeah, written in 1265. And there's the book, okay? And it's the best-known work. It's one of the classics of the history of philosophy, one of the most influential works of Western literature. Okay? You should know about it. In fact, this book basically is a sort of primer. What is Christianity? How do we know that God exists? What do we know about Jesus? He defines the dogma, what people believe in this book. And he also takes up various issues, like what is a just war? Can you go to war? Is it good to have a war? All sorts of issues, ethics. And until very recently, it's kind of read by anybody who wants to become a priest. You have to know your Summa Theology, you have to know your Aquinas. And he is, in a sense, the chief gaksha, the chief wisdom of the church. Until still, kind of held up as the saint of learning. He has got a book of wisdom. Okay. And he starts to use philosophy and logic and, mathematics. He also is a great teacher. And, of course, he is a champion of what he calls liberal arts. These are people who are non-Christians. In fact, many of them are people who are, in early Christianity, there were some Christians, some people, various beliefs of Christianity which were considered not orthodox, and they were kind of pushed out. And so that they're variations of early Christian. And some are other religions completely, Jewish or Islam, or from the Muslim world, from the Arabs. In other words, what you see and particularly this guy here, Averroes. Let's look him up. Who is he? And here's his picture. Look at it. He looks, there. In fact, there's the picture you see there. Averroes is the Latinized form of Jan Rushit. Full name that. Medieval Muslim polymath. He wrote on logic. Aristotelian Islamic philosophy, theology, Islamic jurisprudence, psychology, political, classical music theory, geography, mathematics. In other words, he is from the Islamic world, and his Gakamon was kind of brought into, basically under St. Thomas. St. Thomas is kind of taking the Greek and Roman, but he's also taking in Roman, the Arabian world scholarship, and kind of appropriating it, taking it in, and then making it his own, putting it into, bringing it all together. And kind of, so that the Christian scholarship becomes sort of kind of all-encompassing, taking in and also Christianizing it. Okay. You got the word appropriate. Make it into one's own. Now, have you ever you've studied world history? Sekaishi, world history, a little bit. The time of Socrates was about the 5th century BC. So that's Greece. Now, the Roman Republic and we can see a transition from Greece to Rome. And the Roman Republic is in around 5th century, is about the 3rd century. And that means that also in Rome, some of those ideas, a republic, there's no big king. It's a republic. It has a senate. It has meetings, and it brings in some of the ideals of Greece to Rome. Rome is in Italy. Greece is in Greece, right? Okay. Now, and then the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, it starts around the 1st century BC and continues on. And the fall of the Roman Empire, you know, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire has lasting a long time. The fall of the Roman Empire is around the 4th century. So it's Rome, and you know, the Roman Empire. The center of Roman Empire is Rome, Roma. Anybody been to Rome? Nice place. You know, aren't you getting excited to go and see these places? Oh, okay, Rome. Now, and then after the fall is often called the Middle Ages, medieval. Then some people even call it the Dark Ages. Let's just Dark Ages, because in many ways they weren't so dark, but because many of barbarian tribes from the north, and including the Huns and the Visigoths and various groups of people, Germanic tribes, take over, and for a while the kind of the peak of civilization gets clouded. So much of the kind of the civilization of Greece and Rome is pushed down and then comes up later again. So Renaissance, okay? You got that, okay? Now this is just kind of basic background, because Rome was very much depending on some of its ideals, its political ideals, its economic ideals, its worldview was very much dependent on Greece. And how they would do education. You know, how you would educate young people. But, here's another name. Cicero. Cicero. 106 to 43 BC. How about his name? Cicero. Good one to know. He was active during the time and just at the end of the Roman Republic. just toward the end of the Republic. And he was a great, well, he was a philosopher and and teacher and so forth, but he was especially known for his skill at speaking, at oratory. Oh, goodness, not oratory. He was an orator. O-R-A-T-O-R. An orator, a speaker. He was in other words, his skill was able to give talks that would make people excited, and also he would be able to bring. Anybody gone to studied about debate? Anybody on the ICU debating team? You know, ICU has a debating club. And so in debate you have to kind of be prepared. You have to know things. You have to make your points clear. You have to make a good argument, and then think about a counter argument. So, well, that's a skill. And you develop that skill of oratory to become an orator. And so Cicero was a great orator. And he was not only was he an educator, a gaksha, he was also a politician. And he used his skill at oratory, to be able to speak, in the Senate. In other words, he gave good speeches and persuasive speeches. We must do this because 1, 2, 3, 4. Don't you agree? How can you not agree? Because his skill at persuasion. And of course, to be a good politician, you need to be able to persuade people. You need to be able to, get your message across clearly. So he was very much interested, in other words, to keep Rome a republic, to keep the people involved in politics, who would be participants. He wanted to make sure that education would encourage people to learn how to make arguments, to speak, to become participants in government, to think, to reason, to train citizens to be leaders of society. In other words, and of course, again, Rome is not a society that everybody is, it's mainly men. And the education of men, he wanted to make sure that education is not just simply for your own self-cultivation, but to become a leader of society. Have you ever looked at the original goal of ICU in 1953, the mission statement? Why ICU? It says, we want to create leaders for the new Japan. Sengo Nihon, leaders. And that's actually going back to the ideas of Cicero. Education is to create leaders. So he started to stress among the various subjects that you could study, speech, oratory, the use of language, grammar, rhetoric. These sorts of skills were very important. And that is called the 3 traditional language arts, the trivium. Grammar, rhetoric, those become privileged. And this is from the time of Cicero. To be able to speak, to become a good speaker, to be able to persuade people. Because you're going to use those skills in government, in your political life. All citizens should be active in political life. But then there's also, underneath that, the arts of the first degree. The 4 branches form the quadrivium, the 4 second degree: music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. And so, here's our picture here. And so of the 7, you see there's 3 and 4. Well, Cicero is going to add those the ideas of speaking it, making them really part of the kind of the mainstay. They're kind of particularly important. Also, he said, of course, education should also have geometry and the natural science and so forth like that. You had to be a kind of a whole, a broad education. Cicero is back here talking about the need for sort of a very well-rounded education. What he called encyclopedic. And the word encyclopedia, you know, like it comes from, again, Cicero is using this idea here that educational knowledge is encyclical. It's universal. It is the word, in other words, we have to have the sort of both science and the arts and sciences, all of these kind of liberal arts. And he also started to, it's from Cicero, try to say, well, of these liberal arts, you know, there some, like the speaking arts, are more important, but we have to know them all. And he started to make a classification. Seiri suru. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, boom, boom, and kind of order them. So this is the time when we're kind of emerging the idea of 7 liberal arts as each of them distinct, as a sort of discipline. Is there an E there? Nai kana? A discipline. And the word he used in Latin for these particular things was disciplina. It's the discipline. There is an E at the end. D-I-S-C-I-P-I-P-L-I-N-E. A discipline. This universal education was meant to create good citizens. Okay. Now, and because Cicero has a big influence on education in the Roman Empire. But you see here, we're not, with Cicero, we don't have any Christian elements. This is before Christianity spreads widely through the Roman Empire. And it's only when we start the Republic falls, the empire takes over, and then we're talking about, you know, like Julius Caesar. We're talking about the people who are emperors. It's a very different style of government. But when we get into the Roman Empire, there is still an emperor, but there's still a senate. There's still a sort of, and there's still a forum where people can participate. So we are going to move instead the person who starts the process of taking the liberal arts and making them into Christian education. And that is a man named St. Augustine. Now, do you know his name? How do you spell it? Augustine. Got it? Anybody know who he is? Augustine. And what book he wrote? Look him up. Don't be shy. I can look him up too. Who's going to be quickest? St. Augustine. And there's his picture. Very nice name. Here's St. Augustine. Oh, it's a city. Okay. I can go look at some other one. Oh, I see. It's probably because I had Saint. Okay. St. Augustine of Hippo. The dates here, 354 to 430 AD. Okay, theologian, philosopher. His writings were very influential in the development of Western Christianity and philosophy. Okay, and he wrote his book called The City of God. Also his Confessions. Those are the two works that he's most known for. And he was born in northern Africa. And he was originally Christian, but after a while he gave up Christianity. And he went to school in Carthage, which is in Tunisia. And he started to study for more like a government career, or maybe to become a lawyer. And so he studied particularly rhetoric. And he went to university. And his early university was, he wasn't a very, あまりよくできない学生. He seemed to like to drink a lot of wine. I had lots of women. In fact, he got a woman pregnant. I had illicit affairs. And he got caught up in a sort of cult religion. So his early life was kind of messy. And we know about this from his Confessions. He wrote a book called, here's what I used to be, and here's now how I am now. And his books on confessions. And he got involved with a religion called Manichaeism, which was spreading very widely through northern Africa. And at that time was one of the most popular religions in the world. And Manichaeism, have you ever heard of that religion? It's sort of, let's see here. Here it is, Manichaeism. One of the good things about this Wikipedia, of course, is that when you I'd never heard of Manichaeism. You can check, and it'll take you to Manichaeism. A dualistic cosmology, struggle between a good spiritual world of light, an evil world of darkness, spread through the northern Africa, Arabic, Syriac-speaking regions, 3rd to 7th century, and was one of the most widespread religions in the world. And actually, the Manichaeism took in some of the teachings of the Buddha, and some of the teachings of Islam, and some of the teachings of Christianity, kind of mixed them all together, and Zoroaster and Jesus and the Buddha, and tried to kind of make a kind of a composite new religion called the religion of light. Well, Augustine became a follower. And then Augustine moved to Rome and started his career, but he started to have more and more doubts about Manichaeism. And he kind of became depressed, and he didn't know what to do. And then he went to a particular Christian thinker named Ambrose. And he started to study under Ambrose, and he had a conversion experience. He reconverted to Christianity. And he became Christian in 387. St. Augustine, born Christian, but then 387 becomes Christian again. And then he returned to North Africa, and he set up a monastery and an education center to teach Christianity in where he was. Okay, and he wrote, and he started to become an educator. And what he tried to do in his school and his monastery was, again, use the ideas of liberal arts, but then add them, bring them into the Christian framework. And so he is the link between the so-called Greek and Roman world and Cicero, and then before that, Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, and then later on, people like St. Thomas Aquinas, who are going to, naturally, we think the liberal arts are part of, the medieval church, the medieval university, and then goes up to the present day, particularly kind of developed in Christian universities. The link is St. Augustine. He starts to kind of incorporate, appropriate those ideas from the Greeks and Romans and bring them into the Christian tradition. Now, how could he do it? See, Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, these were not believers of Christianity. Okay, they had their own gods, like Jupiter and Zeus and all of those people, right? So they had their own, but how do you think he could rationalize bringing in so-called pagan ideas into the church and start teaching them to people who wanted to become Christian? So he had to make an argument. And he said that this type of learning was not invented by the pagans, by Greek thinkers, but discovered. In other words, do you see the distinction between invention and discovery? If they just discovered it, it was already there. And they hakken shimashita. If they made it, it's chiga. And so he said, Plato, and they discovered it was already there. It had already been made by man, by God. It had already been made by God. It was just waiting to be discovered. And they happened to find it first. But it's originally, motomoto, the liberal arts was made by God. It's originally Christian. It was a gift of God to how to understand the world, how to understand what God is doing in the world, to understand, the origins and the development of the world. Now, through the liberal arts, we can understand the world around us that God has made. So he said it's sort of, it's taking back something that was originally Christian. That's the argument he uses. And instead of, when he's teaching liberal arts, and of course there's the idea of oratory, to speak, to become a good speaker, instead of, now he's teaching people who want to become Christians, or in a monastery school. So he said, oratory, or rhetoric and grammar, is good for explaining Christianity, for preaching, for speaking the word of God, and making it persuasive to people who might not believe otherwise, to convert them, to be able to speak important. And so, in other words, the skills, liberal arts skills, have a different purpose, not just simply used in government, but also to kind of convert people, to make people understand the word of God. So, to succeed in teaching about God, and also to learn about the acts of God in the world, to understand divine truths. So you see here then we get the bringing in of the classical tradition, Greece and Rome, to a new evolving education system and kind of worldviews developed by the Christians. People at the original, they knew that these were not originally Christians, like Socrates. So they had to make different arguments. That was the argument that St. Augustine used. Another Christian theologian put it differently. He said, do you know in the Edo period in Japan as well, if you want to make good crops, you use sort of a koyashi, kind of fertilizer. And sometimes your koyashi, the kind of fertilizer, is made from human as well as animal manure, fun, and then you put it on the rice, and the rice goes up good. So he says here, even as the dung, that's the manure, that's that fun, is spread among the fields and it enriches a good harvest, those filthy writings of the pagan poets are an aid to divine eloquence. We can, just like, you can use that dirty stuff to make the rice grow, the wheat grow. We can use that dirty stuff of the pagans, of the Greek and Romans, to make our divine wisdom prosper and spread throughout the world. And so they had to use, but in both ways you're bringing in the classical Greek, Roman ideas into Christianity. Got it? Okay. This is from the 12th century. The queen of philosophy, throning over the Greek philosophers, Socrates and Plato, surrounded by the 7 liberal arts. You can see here the queen is of all sciences, philosophy. All wisdom comes from God. Only the wise are able to fulfill their wishes. And so all of a sudden, you see the 7 liberal arts by the 12th century, it's very much purely in a Christian tradition here. We're talking about all wisdom from God. And yet we have, under the queen, we have people like Plato and Socrates, these 2 thinkers who are considered precursors of Christian thought. And then we get these other 7 liberal arts here, 7 streams, and so forth, like a circle. And each of them has a sort of grammar, carries a book and a switch. Everybody can learn the meaning of words, syllables, and letters. A book, but a switch. It's kyoiku. You gotta learn or else. Very tough teacher. Thanks to me, your orator, your speeches will move the listener. My arguments will flow rapidly like the bark of a dog. 1, 2, 3. I'll make my points clear. Music. I teach my art with the help of various instruments, and then we have here geometry. I have faith in numbers. I shall show how they're related to each other. And geometry, through precision, I measure the earth. I owe my name to the celestial bodies. I predict the future. And then we get here, all of the, there's all of this is, this becomes basically the core of a Christian education. So that's what I want to say, how it starts from the Greeks and Romans and makes its transition into the liberal arts. It become the core of a Christian education. So, and the Christian education could be for becoming a Christian, becoming a preacher, working in the monastery, but it also could become a career in the church, in law, in business, in education. It was demanding that you would be a well-rounded, well-educated person, and by this time, first of all, monasteries, which were teaching institutions, and then later early universities. How do you use universities often growing out of churches? What do you teach? Teach the 7 liberal arts. Okay, so let's take a short break, just 5 minutes, okay, and then I want to go to that chapel and look at, because it's kind of, it's sort of interesting the way they bring in, you can just see the Christian elements on the door of that chapel, okay? So far, all right? You got the point? Anybody having trouble with the English? 大体分かったね? I'm just kind of repeating it and making it easy. Greek, Rome, then Christian, and how what was once something completely even opposed to Christianity becomes, the core of a Christian education. That process of appropriation, of bringing something and making it one's own. Look at Japan today. How did Japan appropriate Western ideas in the Meiji period? From Edo period, where people are wearing kimono and eating and they're thinking and so forth, completely. And then now, 100 years later, basically there's a lot of appropriation, taking something from the outside and making it one's own. If you can imagine, if we were in the Edo period and I'm the teacher, we're doing a very different type of gakumo. But we've now appropriated sort of Western teaching styles, Western teaching ideas into our school system. Maybe some of the thing is still there, but that whole process of appropriation, something that wasn't originally this different, but changes things quite radically. But we're looking here at how Christian education appropriated the things from Greece. Okay? And we'll come back to that. We'll look at how that develops later into the medieval period and up to the 19th, 20th century now. And so that we come back at the end of our course, Education for the 21st Century, Socrates revisited. Does Socrates have anything to tell us in the 21st century? Okay, got it? 5-minute break? Okay, you got the idea. The question here was, when did Rome become Christian? Okay, it's around 312. The Romans had their own gods. They had, it was basically the Greek god, like Zeus was the king of the gods, and in Rome it's Jupiter. And then there's Juno or Poseidon, Neptune, Hades, Pluto, Ares, Mars, Hermes, Mercury, Apollo. You've heard all these kind of names. These were the Greek gods, and there is the idea of the gods, and there's various rites and rituals that had to be given to these gods. You may have either in the Greek, from Homer, you get a lot of stuff of the gods, and in the classic in Roman literature is Virgil's Aeneid. And it tells you all about the various gods, okay? Now, of all these various gods, Christianity was quite different. When does Christianity begin? Like year 1 or so, right? Okay. And the 1st century AD, the beginning of the Christian church. Christianity only had one God. And the Romans persecuted the Christians. So Christians often in the first, second, third century often had to go underground. And they were one of many new religions. The early Christian church was not codified. And it only becomes codified, say, 3rd, 4th century. You can think of one of the beginnings of the Christian church as we know it today. And the Christian empire, from persecution to acceptance of Christianity, became with the time of Constantine, 312. And Constantine was from Rome, but also he established New Rome, which was Constantinople. And so the Roman Empire had the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire, one capital in Rome, in Italy, and another capital in Constantinople, Constantine, or New Rome. And then the Roman Empire gets divided into East and West. And Christianity later on, of course, there is the Western, the Catholic Church that begins with Rome, and then there's the Eastern Orthodox, the Orthodox Church. So there's even now there's that division between East and West in the Christian churches. And under Constantine, Christianity was legitimized, and then the center of Christianity was in Rome, which is now the Vatican, and at St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, which became the headquarters for the Pope. And so that's when that system starts, 3rd, 4th century and on. So from that, then we went in and say, well, why would Christians who have been kind of basically taken over the Roman Empire, why would they be interested in the teachings of Roman philosophy and Greek philosophy and so forth? Then we saw the appropriation taking in. And so to the extent that by the time we get to the 12th, 13th century, people have almost kind of forgotten. And they've really brought in Aristotle and Socrates into their Christian framework. So it's become how the ideas of these so-called pagan philosophers become the core of Christian education. Now, I asked you to look at this document here, 7 Liberal Arts and the West Door of the Chartres Cathedral. It's an old article, but the Chartres Cathedral. You read it a little bit? It's kind of hard. It's short though. Where is the Chartres Cathedral? Where is that? Chartres. Anybody can pronounce French a little better than I can? Chartres Cathedral. There it is. Chartres Cathedral. Daisedo. There it is. Hajimata wa 1145. Let's look at it in English. Okay. Medieval Catholic Cathedral, about 80 kilometers southwest of Paris. One of the finest examples of Gothic architecture. World Heritage Site, constructed between 1194 and 1250. The last of, the site and bishopric in the. It's an exceptional state of preservation. There, it's the picture of it there, and it's especially known for its stained glass windows. Beautiful. 写真あるかな? And here is the door. Here's the door that they're talking about. The central tripium. There's sort of 3 arches, and it's in the center of the 3 arches. And I hope that when you look at when you go, let's just take the. I made a bigger picture of that here. That when Christianity is, almost all religions have symbolisms, and so it's you can read it. A little bit of work on what's going on here in a picture or on sculpture or even in music and so forth. So here, what's going on in this picture, in this door? If I can even make it in. Let's just start here. What does? Do you remember how that text goes? I wrote it out here too. The first paragraph of that thing says, according to medieval theologians, the Virgin Mary, by virtue of her, she's perfection, purity of her soul, possessed all the wisdom of which man is capable of. So, right in the center of this is the Virgin Mary. And she is the possessor of all wisdom. And, and actually in the medieval period, the Virgin Mary, Mother of Christ, was often a very central object of worship. Sometimes people worship more Mary than even Jesus. So it's a very kind of center. But she's known for her wisdom, her knowledge. And so remember in one picture we had the center was the philosophy. Well, here in this one, the center of all knowledge is the Virgin Mary. And a direct reference to this wisdom is to be found in the allegories of the 7 liberal arts, which just outside an inner circle of adorning angels decorate this half-moon space above the door, what is called the tympanum. And it's sort of hard to see here. Where are these 7 liberal arts? in this picture here, sorry, I can't even see it too well myself. The sculptor of the door of the room has portrayed this as art of a woman threatening. Let's see here. Let's see if we can find in that picture here a woman threatening two young children who are writing. 見えてこないね. Here's the west front. There's the months and signs of the zodiac. The seven liberal arts here. Let's see here. Inner order, angels. Outer order, seven liberal arts. Sort of different. And here is also the other more liberal arts. There's music. Here's the lady with the rod. You see it there? Switch and the two studies here. And here's music. And various students here. Anyway, what I wanted to say is that if you, the text didn't include any sort of illustrations, but that if we go in there, on the door itself are, there's 3 and there's 4, and it's all of them are just kind of neatly put in there. And basically, as this article tells you, and it very short, is that not only are the 7 liberal arts are there, but then the whole universe, the moon and the sun and the stars and the planets. In other words, there's in that door contains basically all knowledge, and the whole world is just sort of captivated on that door. It's just full. Now a lot of it's faded and a lot of it's kind of a little bit destroyed over time, but it could be almost kind of a training tool. Look up and inside all parts of it, there is kind of the whole universe of knowledge, sort of put all in one concise form, and each thing quite symbolized. So the whole cosmos is represented, the spiritual, the psychic, the corporal, and in other words, these 3 doors that are here, just going to kind of try to bring together all of the thinking of the liberal arts. And inside that are not just simply the various Christian saints and Christian thinkers, but also you'll find Aristotle. Aristotle has Cicero is in there, various Boethius, Pythagoras, Euclid, Ptolemy. In other words, inside this door, are all the kinds of Christian. Right at the very center is the Virgin Mary, but all around her are a certain number of Christian thinkers, but also kind of supported by kind of thinkers from all around the world, but particularly from the past, from Greek and Roman times. So you get as a sort of teaching tool for that time, and also for the people who couldn't read. You can look at the wall and be explained. Well, there's this, and sort of unfortunately now, when visitors go to that, you might just pass right and not notice it. But if you do visit most churches that had that type of symbolism, you can look around. You can learn so much from the art and sculpture. Anybody been to Macau? I went to Macau a few years back, and there is also there a early Christian church and actually because in Japan there was a kakure, or before they were Christians, and then they were oidasareta, and many of the Japanese Christians went to Macau, and the Japanese Christians founded a church in Macau. And the facade of it is still there, but you see lots of Japanese references in that church, and also the Christian, and the whole kind of story is hidden in some of the sculpture on the wall. So look carefully when you get to visit these type of places. Okay. The point of the lecture today, what? Summarize?
What were Christian principles, like things from like the Greek and Roman times and previous teachings, they eventually became completed to become the more liberal arts.
Yeah. And we went through time from 5th century BC to the kind of Middle Ages, like the Chartres Cathedral is in the 13th century. So we kind of went through 1,500, 600, 700 years, over 1,500 years of history. Pretty quickly to kind of take the Greeks and how they got into the Romans, and then how the Romans confolded into the Christians take it up and develop it. And so to the extent that, now at the very core of education is the Virgin Mary, the Mother of God, teaching the children, teaching the world. But around her, but taking in the knowledge of the past, and that becomes the 7 liberal arts. We're going to go on from here, and next week we'll look at how this Christian tradition starts to be part of a new universities. The founding of early universities in Italy, in France, and England, like Oxford University, and how then these liberal arts kind of get taken into the university teaching. And so that's our next transition, to look at the age of these early universities. Okay, that's where we're going next. And then from that, we're going to go into not just Christian universities, but into more, say, secular universities, like how universities become more and more, apart from Christian teachings, like Harvard University might start it off as a Christian teaching, but becomes more and more secular universities, and then private universities. And then eventually we're going to be looking at schools. Who went to Middlebury? Yes, like Middlebury, which is, it might have started out Christian, but becomes a sort of private, small liberal arts school. But not so much teaching Christianity, but liberal arts become part of this education philosophy in the United States in schools like Middlebury. So that's where we're going in the future. Questions you had?
Can you explain a little, maybe you might explain, like what happened during the Middle Ages Dark Age period? What was like the significant occurrences then, or regarding the Christian?
In many ways, why it's called the Dark Ages is particularly from a Christian point of view, because a lot of the Christian education, because of the fall of the Roman Empire and no strong authority, and many now they're kind of, it's sort of, again, a pejorative term to call them, pagans or barbarians and so forth, but various peoples from north, like Vikings, and various other Germanic tribes, and then various people also from Central Asia come, and it's just sort of so the centers of high civilization are destroyed. So the Roman Empire is no more, and yet there's sort of a breakdown of central authority. But also the centers of high learning become confined to many small monasteries, and some of those are destroyed. And then some of the outposts, like one of the areas of learning that's left, is actually is in Ireland. And strangely to say, for much of the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th century, where Christian education still holds strong, it's way out in the fringes, like in Ireland or in parts of England, but because it's so separate. And then Ireland itself also gets attacked by the Vikings and so forth. So a lot of the centers of learning are really destroyed. And what's happening here is kind of also a lot of rediscovery. But basically, some of the monasteries have kind of kept up the tradition of books and writings and scholarship, and it starts to be actually from the 10th, 11th century, many Irish monks come back into Ireland and bring back knowledge and bring back the Christian traditions. So it's that sort of why it's often called Dark Ages. In many other ways, there's quite a lot of development in infusing new types of people, new types of ideas. If you take a history in the form of diversity, then these aren't Dark Ages. They're kind of new ideas spreading throughout Europe. But from the Christian point of view, you know, they were kind of that the centers of learning were destroyed, and centers of centralized government were destroyed. And then start to rebuild in the late Middle Ages, in the 11th, 12th. By the time we get to the Chartres here, building up, you know, new traditions. So, but the idea of a dark age, and again, if you look at it, is kind of controversial. It used to be fairly often called the Dark Ages, but now I think that term isn't used so much. Okay, good. Okay, arigato. So as soon as you finish your comments, please bring it up here, and then we'll see you on Thursday, but be sure to come, bring your friends. Okay, okay, good. Arigato ne.